All right, aloha everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2022 Hawaii Early College convening. We would like to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the event website. Please keep all cameras off and microphones muted throughout the session if you would not like to be recorded. There will be live captioning for accessibility purposes, and captions may not accurately reflect what is being said and will be corrected during the session recordings. Recordings and resources will be posted to the site between 3 to 4 weeks after today's presentation. If you have any questions for today's presenters, please add them to the chat box, and we'll have a moderator share your questions at the end of this session. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers today to share about online orientation for early college students. Okay. All right, go ahead, Nicole, take it away.
Thanks. Tati, could we get the slide deck up also? So hi everyone, welcome to our session, Preparing Students for Online College Classes through the UH Early College Online Orientation. We're excited to have you join us today to learn more about an online orientation created to meet the needs of high school students taking an early college class for the first time. Next slide, please. Before we get started on sharing more information, we wanted to take a minute to introduce ourselves to you all, starting with Dina.
Hi, I'm Dina Cabralda. I'm the early college coordinator at Lelehua High School. This is my second year as an early college coordinator there, and we participated in the online orientation pilot twice so far. So I'm here to share a little bit about that.
Good morning. My name is Amy Rozek, and I work for academic technologies at UHITS, specifically on distance learning student support.
And hi everyone, I'm Nicole Atwood. I'm the Early College Program Director at Hawaiʻi P-20 Partnerships for Education.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Wendy Vincent, Interim Administrator for the Career Readiness Section in the Hawaii State Department of Education, Office of Curriculum and Instructional Design. My section is composed of 8 programs dedicated to fostering college, career, and civic readiness, and early college is one of those programs. I also serve as the Department State Specialist for the program. I'm delighted to be with my colleagues this morning to share the exciting work that we have been involved in related to improving the online learning experience for early college students. Next slide, please. In today's session, we're going to provide you with some context for this work, notably in sharing highlights from student surveys that were administered in 2020 and 2021 that contributed to our decision to engage in this work. We'll then showcase the orientation itself, which was piloted in spring 2022 and fall 2022, and share insights into the feedback we received and utilized to improve upon the orientation. We'll hear from Dina about her experience as an early college coordinator, shepherding students through the process, including considerations for how coordinators can best help students in the experience. And finally, we'll share some thoughts regarding the future of this work and take questions from you all in the audience. Next slide, please. So without further ado, let's set the stage. Next slide, please. The transition to online learning in spring 2020 was of particular concern, given the purpose of the early college program and the target populations we seek to serve, notably economically disadvantaged, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students, groups that are traditionally underrepresented in higher education. Prior to the pandemic, the vast majority of early college classes were held face-to-face, so we knew it was going to be challenging for a number of our students, particularly because they weren't going to be able to utilize or rely on the in-person support systems at their schools or UH campuses that are so vital to early college success. So Nicole and I, along with Dan Rumpala, who's an evaluation specialist at Hawaiʻi P-20, worked together to develop a survey to administer to early college students at the end of the spring 2020 term. And this survey became the basis for additional end-of-term surveys that were developed for fall 2020 and spring 2021. For those 2 surveys, our development team also included Melanie Nakatani, who was assisting Dan at Hawaiʻi P-20. While our overarching goal for all of the surveys was to utilize student feedback for program improvement purposes, each survey had a different focus. In spring 2020, we really wanted to hear about students' experiences as a result of transitioning to an online environment, and then determine whether any adjustments could be made for fall 2020. In fall 2020 and spring 2021, the scope of our survey work also included collecting information on online learning during the pandemic, as well as how our unique population was doing in meeting the demands of early college classes, on top of coping with a variety of stressors during the pandemic. And while the response rates were not as high as we hoped, the surveys yielded notable insights for program planning and improvement purposes, particularly in the latter two surveys. Now, given the context of this presentation, I'm going to share high-level trends. Next slide, please. So first, it's important to acknowledge the variety of issues that students encountered or were exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. In all of the surveys, we heard from students about the stressors that they were experiencing that caused a significant disruption to their learning and academic performance. And we pressed on this a little bit more with each survey. And the percentages that you're seeing here on the screen are specifically from the spring 2021 survey. So these findings really underscored our desire to do what we could to provide additional resources to students to aid and support them in their learning. Next slide, please. And particularly because students repeatedly expressed that it's helpful to know ahead of time what to expect in taking an online class. More specifically, students shared that it would be helpful if training or tutorials could be provided on the online learning platforms and tools that would be used in their classes. Since Laulima is the official learning platform for the University of Hawaii, we thought it made sense to focus some of our efforts here. Next slide, please. We also noticed that there was a correlation between students who indicated that they enjoyed working with online learning platforms like Laulima and students who found great benefit in taking online early college classes. The students in this camp felt that taking early college classes online opened up more time for them and gave them more flexibility. They felt that they were in a position to engage in coursework when they were at their best, as well as carve out time when they were able to focus on their coursework and have less distractions. And interlinked with that perceived benefit was their assessment that taking online classes was more conducive to learning. Students felt safer from both a health perspective and a social emotional perspective, and more were comfortable with engaging with their peers and instructors in an online format. These students ultimately felt like the experience was helping prepare them better to be, learners and college ready. By contrast, students who indicated that they encountered problems working with online platforms like Laulima generally found the online learning experience to be more challenging than beneficial. Now, these students did not like losing in-person interaction, whether it be with their instructors or their peers. And many of these particular students had difficulties adjusting to the format, particularly because it put a lot of responsibility on them to be self-directed. Next slide, please. We saw a number of comments similar to this one that highlighted a need to ensure resources are available to best set up students for success in their online early college classes. Next slide, please. The majority of respondents reported receiving some form of introductory help with online learning in both the fall 2020 and spring 2021 surveys. The introductory help largely centered around the use of tutorials and appeared to focus on Laulima and or tools that students would be expected to use during the semester, such as Canva and Flipgrid. A small percentage of respondents indicated that the introductory help included targeted expectations for online learning. And while we were pleased to see these results, we also saw an opportunity to work with the creator of UH's orientation to online learning and potentially spin off a version aimed at early college students. Next slide, please. We noticed that there was a significant correlation between receiving some form of introductory help and increased comfortability with taking early college classes, as well as increased interest in continuing on with early college classes in future terms. And since online learning will play a permanent role in the future of the early college program, it was important to us to pursue this effort. Nicole, I'll turn it over to you.
So the survey data that Wendy just presented was a compelling reason for us to consider creating a system-level resource available to students taking online early college classes, as well as the UH early college coordinators and high school early college coordinators supporting these students. As Wendy mentioned, it's likely that a subset of early college classes will continue to be offered in an online format in the future, since this has been identified as a strategy to address access issues for students attending rural and remote schools by UH and HIDO leadership. So given this context, we considered two important questions. The first was, how can we better support high school students taking an online early college course to ensure that they're aware of campus resources and get an orientation to UH's online learning platform before starting their first online early college class? And two, how can we ensure that students are prepared to take an online early college class from an academic success and readiness perspective? As Wendy mentioned, we were very lucky to be able to collaborate with UH Online Innovation Center and specifically Amy Rozek, who will be presenting next and who designed the original UH orientation to online learning. Based on feedback from some high school early college coordinators who had their students participate in the original UH orientation to online learning, as well as instructors who participated in our summer 2021 early college course redesign professional development, the original UH online orientation was edited with two goals in mind: trying to shorten the content of the orientation and customizing some of the content and resources for early college students. The information in this orientation could be valuable for all early college students, but our target audience for this orientation was students taking an online early college class for the first time, whether that's a synchronous or asynchronous online class. Before Amy provides us with more information, first iteration and second iteration of the UH Early College online orientation, and walks us through, does a walkthrough of the fall 2022 UH Early College online orientation, I just wanted to add a quick note. So this orientation isn't meant to replace any of the activities that UH campuses may already be doing to provide information to students taking online early college classes. We do hope that this orientation can be a useful resource if your high school or your UH campus currently doesn't have an orientation or detailed guidance for students taking an online early college class for the first time. So now I'm going to pass it over to Amy.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the UH Early College online orientation, kind of where we started and where we are now, and then end with a video. Next slide, please. So even though students have had a few years of online learning experience, first due to the transition to remote learning back in March of 2020, and then subsequently with planned online learning, we can't necessarily make assumptions about how their high school experiences will translate into the UH environment. Moreover, as we just heard, student surveys were showing us that students needed and wanted more information on how to be successful. So really, it only made sense to tailor an online learning orientation specific to students who are participating in UH early college classes for that first time. The orientation was designed to increase student preparation for and knowledge of online learning at UH as an early college student. It provided them with a welcoming yet informative environment where they could acclimate themselves to LALIMA, our learning management system at UH, as well as showing them how to access help as a UH online early college student. By the end of the orientation, we hope that students had felt empowered with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful to complete their upcoming online UH early college class. Next slide, please. So the starting point for the orientation actually began back in March of 2018. So you notice that's 2 years prior to the pandemic. And this is when design work commenced on the parent version of the UH Early College orientation. That version was centered on UH students who were planning to enroll in the 5-week online programs. And a lot of research was done on how to set this up. The content that we selected was after we researched several different online orientation programs. We looked at best practices, and ultimately the inspiration and foundation for this initial orientation came from Kapiolani's Success for Online Learners Soul Module 1. An intentional decision was made to deliver the orientation using a navigation theme that would be meaningful to students attending an Indigenous serving institution. With help from the Polynesian Voyaging Society, Hokulea, and the Malama Honua Voyage, we were able to create an engaging program that incorporated sharing the wisdom and knowledge through the traditional navigation lens. I'd like to thank OEVTV for approving the use of the images that you're going to see. And they still do exist in our orientation today. With each following semester, we improved, got feedback, made some tweaks, and you're going to see that throughout the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, that the orientation has evolved. It's undergone continual improvement since its inception. And then moreover, for the last 3 terms, the UH online orientation was customized and rebranded to meet the needs of our early college students. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between the original UH online orientation and then what we have developed and deployed for the UH early college students. So in creating the UH Early College orientation, we were very mindful to reflect on this special population of early college learners by incorporating appropriate wording and references to their dual status. Some wording was removed from or edited within the orientation to make it more relevant for these learners. For example, to help mitigate the TLDR issue experience with a 6-page syllabus, and yes, it is 6 pages. In fact, sometimes it bumps onto 7. We incorporated call-out boxes with important information to grab the student's attention. Additionally, we updated the resources module to include early college specific resources. Next, we moved on some of the UH orientation module content into an optional module that focused on technology that instructors might use in their classes. So I think you heard earlier Padlet, Flipgrid, and there's a few other technologies that some instructors will use. So we put those in a separate module in case a student needed to refer to them later. And then lastly, we customized some of the activities and assessments to make them more meaningful to these students. For example, within Module 1, we replaced a syllabus acknowledgement statement with a graded syllabus quiz. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you have heard the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to extrapolate that here and say that a video then must be worth 1,000,000 words. And while not quite 1,000,000 words, I'd like to show you a short video that walks you through our orientation. Welcome to the UH Early College Orientation Fall 2022 edition. On the screen, you'll see the overview page that welcomes students to the orientation. The page is split into 2 sections. The left side includes contact information for the facilitators, as well as 2 easy steps to get started. The right side of the screen lists the announcements that were sent to students during the orientation. An email was sent to students to join the orientation on August 10th. This email included login instructions and a short demonstration video on how to access the site within Laulima. Now, let's begin by clicking on the Start Here tab first. This is located on the left-hand side menu. This page provides a short orientation introduction and video, as well as a statement about the orientation's intended audience. Information is provided on how to navigate the orientation, as well as what to expect in each module. The Get Started page concludes with a few tips on how to complete the orientation. Next, we'll navigate to the first module, which is the basics of online learning. Understanding the nature, characteristics, and expectations of online learning helps students have a clearer vision to success.
The infographic differentiates the different online class formats, while 5 short videos discern the myths from realities in online learning. Students are also introduced to the importance of the syllabus. They take a short quiz, and the module concludes with a knowledge check. Now, before we go to Module 2, let's take a look at the syllabus. The syllabus outlines the orientation expectations. Notice some of the teal-colored pop-out boxes to point out important information. Students will learn about the different grading exercises in the orientation, the technology requirements, as well as some important UH policies and procedures. Module 2 focuses on communication and engagement in the online environment. The module begins by outlining communication expectations. A quick netiquette video demonstrates discussion board etiquette, and the Aloha Principles infographic encourages students to treat each other with aloha. Next, an embedded slide deck focuses on communications about synchronous as well as asynchronous communications. The learning activities for this module include setting up the Laulima profile and participating in the Introduce Yourself forum. Now we'll move on to Module 3, where self-management strategies are explained. Study skills for online learning, academic integrity, time management, setting up a conducive learning environment, and growth mindset are presented. This lesson is presented primarily through text and video. Students take an academic integrity quiz and must submit a scheduler assignment to help them think about how the online class they're taking will fit into their schedule, as well as to become accustomed to the assignments tool within Laulima. The technology module was originally very text-heavy. We reworked this into a few short lists of tips, as well as a troubleshooting video for students to watch. Students who need additional help with the Laulima tools are directed to the optional assignment section of the orientation. The assessment in this module is completed by 2 knowledge check questions. Our orientation concludes with supports and resources. This module was also tailored for our early college students by modifying some of the content. Class connection and Ohana support are outlined, and a video explaining how to ask for help in your online class is presented. The UH system resources are provided in an infographic format, while the home campus resources are listed separately. Students wrap up the orientation by verbalizing one challenge or lingering question they have about online learning. And we ask them how they might go about getting assistance to answer that question or concern. This is then submitted to the facilitator for feedback. Finally, the orientation ends with a survey. Students are to give their feedback, and those who have completed the orientation are presented with a certificate of completion. Mahalo for your interest in the UH Early College Orientation.
So one last word about the orientation that I'd like to make clear is that it is a facilitated orientation. Nicole, Wendy, and myself served as the facilitators for the past 2 iterations, so students are getting feedback on the information that they are submitting, and we also are watching what the transactions are in the forum. So this is not just play a few videos and take a quiz. It is a facilitated orientation, just like they would have in an asynchronous type of class.
Thanks, Amy. So now that you have a better sense of what the UH Early College online orientation looks like, we'd like to provide you with a sense of the feedback we've gotten from students who have participated so far and the high school counselors who are part of the 2 orientation pilots in spring 22 and fall 22. Next slide, please. So 4 high schools across the state participated in the Spring 22 UH Early College Online Orientation. There was an opportunity after we had a webinar in November 2021 for schools to opt in to participate. We asked that they have a large number of their students taking online classes, particularly online classes for the first time. The 4 high schools you see listed, Ka'u, Lelehua, Moloka'i, and Waipahu, were the schools that participated in the UH Online Early College Orientation for the spring. We did have 2 additional schools originally slated to participate, but they needed to drop out due to COVID-related timing and capacity constraints. So during this term, Spring 22, 244 students were added to the orientation site. 153 of these students, so 63% of all of them added to the site, submitted at least one assignment. And like Amy was showing you, there are 5 modules, so there are assignments or activities associated with all of them. Then 85 students, so 56% of those who submitted at least one scored assignment, completed the orientation with a minimum score of 75% or higher, which is kind of the cutoff to be considered to have completed it. For the fall 2022 term, we originally had 3 high schools interested, but ended up with 2 high schools, Lanai and Lelehua, that participated. During this term, we added 101 students to the site, 94 students, so 92% of those added to the site submitted at least one assignment, and 74 students, so 73% of those who submitted at least one scored assignment, completed the orientation with a minimum score of 75% or higher. So we had a great engagement rate and a pretty good completion rate in the fall 22 term. Next slide, please. So as Amy showed you guys, there's a link to an exit survey included at the end of Module 5 of the UH Early College Online Orientation. And this was included in both the Spring 22 and Fall 22 pilots. So the next few slides are going to provide you with an overview of the student survey data we got before, and kind of how we'll wrap up this section is providing you all with some general feedback from high school early college coordinators at participating high schools, as well as how we use that feedback to make some changes from the spring orientation to the fall orientation. So for the spring 22 term, the majority of the responses you guys are seeing came from Lelehua, thank you Dina, followed by Waipahu, Moloka'i, and Ka'u. For the fall term, the vast majority of our responses again came from Lelehua, followed by Lanai. We had a pretty decent survey response rate for both terms. So in the spring 22 term, 56% of students who submitted at least one scored assignment completed the exit survey. And in the fall term, 51% of students who submitted at least one scored assignment completed the exit survey. So what you can see is just some high-level data points related to the survey. So like we were saying before, kind of our goal and target population for this orientation is it was designed for students taking an online early college class for the first time, both synchronous and asynchronous, although we were hoping to in particular support students taking asynchronous classes. So in the spring 22 term, 83% of students were thinking that they were going to take their spring 22 early college class online. That rate for the fall 22 term was 88%. In the spring 22 term, students who had never taken an early college class at all before in any format was 86%. That rate was 94% for the fall term. And then of students who had never taken an online early college class before, so maybe they had taken an early college class in a face-to-face format, we had 89% of our students never taking an online early college class before in the spring term, and 90% of them never taking an online early college class before in the fall term. So what you can see is that we were hitting our sort of target population for the orientation, which was kind of reassuring for all of us. So next slide, please. Okay, so students who responded to the Spring 22 and Fall 22 UH Early College Online Orientation Exit Survey reported an increase in their preparation or knowledge on several different questions. So this visual is just showing you for one question, but these students reported that they felt more prepared for what to expect in their online early college class and more knowledgeable about strategies to use for success in their online early college class after they had completed the orientation. In addition, and what you're seeing on this slide, is that students reported feeling much more prepared to successfully use LaLima and its related tools in their online early college class. So on this bar graph, everything that's in blue is how students reported how confident they felt to successfully use LaLima and its tools in their online early college class before they participated in the orientation. So 1 is they didn't feel prepared at all, and 10 is that they felt fully prepared. So what you can kind of see is, for the most part, students were kind of more in the middle, beginning of the spectrum before they participated in the orientation. And then their feedback after they participated in the orientation, most of the students were reporting either 8s or 9s, so they're feeling prepared to use LaLima and its related tools in their online early college class. So next slide, please. Okay, some additional survey results. So we anticipated that the orientation would take 2.5 hours to complete. In our first pilot in spring 22, 30% of our survey respondents reported that the orientation took them more than 2.5 hours to complete. And in our second pilot in fall 22, 48% of survey respondents reported that it took them more than 2.5 hours to complete the orientation. So slightly more than we were hoping, although we still think that this gives them a good preview of what it's actually like to participate in LaLima for an online class. Students also reported finding the information in Module 3, which, as Amy showed you guys, was related to self-management strategies, and the activity in Module 3, which was a daily, weekly time scheduler assignment. So students needed to mock up what a day or week for them would look like and how they would slot in their early college course time, as well as homework or prep time associated with those classes with everything else happening in their life. And students found both the Module 3 itself and then the assignment associated with that the most valuable out of all of the assignments. Similar percentages of students recommended making the UH Early College online orientation mandatory for students to complete before their first online early college course. So in the spring 22 term, 72% of students said that it should be mandatory for students to take before they take their first online early college course. And in the fall 22 term, 71% of students recommended that it be mandatory. The top 3 challenges that students reported encountering during the orientation were also similar across both terms. Students reported that it was challenging to find dedicated time to complete the orientation. The orientation was too long, and I had difficulties understanding some of the orientation content. So next slide, please. So based on student feedback and the high school counselor feedback, which we'll be covering in more detail next, changes were made to the UH Early College online orientation between the spring 22 and fall 22 terms. We'll explain these changes in more detail in later slides, but many of the edits were made to improve the applicability of some of the assignments for early college students, condense the wording where possible, and visualize some of the wording or information as videos or other visual resources, as Amy showed earlier, with the hope of making the orientation easier for students to understand and navigate. So this slide compares student responses from spring 22 and fall 22 surveys and reflects any differences in student feedback. So compared to the spring 22 pilot, students who participated in the fall 22 pilot said, more of them said that it was easy for them to navigate the orientation, which is great. That's what we want. Unfortunately, more students also said they spent more than 2.5 hours on the orientation. And what we noticed is that although students still reported Module 3 about self-management strategies and the assignment in Module 3, that daily, weekly time scheduler assignment, as the most valuable, more students valued the communication and engagement module, so Module 2, which talks about online etiquette, and there's an activity related to completing a LaLima profile. And more students valued the challenges and resources assignment in Module 5, which was specifically related to what additional questions do you have, or what would you do if you encountered an issue in your online early college class, and who would you talk to? Okay, next slide, please. So interviews were conducted with high school early college coordinators at the schools who participated in the UH Early College Online Orientation Pilot each term after students completed the orientation and feedback from all of the students' surveys was obtained. In general, coordinators all expressed that the orientation was helpful in assisting students better understand what to expect in their online early college course, providing them with the strategies to be successful in that online early college class, and preparing them to use different tools in LaLima as part of their online early college class. A few of the coordinators also mentioned how helpful the orientation was in helping them personally understand LaLima and how they can better support their online early college students in the future. As a note, the high schools who participated in the orientation targeted and recruited students to participate in slightly different ways and were able to provide varying levels of support, ranging from introducing students to Module 1 through an opt-in process, like, hey, if you're interested in learning more about Module 1, come to the library during this time, to providing support to students in completing all of the modules through designated class time before the online early college class started. Schools that had higher orientation completion rates generally provided more support to their students during dedicated class time and more regularly checked in with students about their progress in the orientation. Another piece of feedback that we got from the high school coordinators is that the handout and video developed for them after the first pilot in spring 22 was mentioned as being helpful. Wendy will share more information with you about that next. And then, as mentioned earlier, feedback from the student surveys and all of our conversations with high school early college coordinators was reviewed in detail by Amy, Wendy, and I after both the first pilot in spring 22 and the second pilot in fall 22. This feedback was used to make changes to the content of the UH Early College online orientation, as well as the supports and or information provided by the orientation facilitators to participating schools and students. Next slide.
So Nicole, Amy, and I spent a lot of time considering the actions we could take in modifying the orientation after the first pilot in spring 2022. And we ultimately agreed not to make too many substantive changes until we conducted at least one more pilot and could then look for trends in the feedback obtained. That said, we did make some notable updates and improvements in the orientation and overall process. Some of those were covered earlier in section 2, but we'd like to highlight them again. So in considering orientation feedback obtained after the first pilot, as well as general feedback obtained in the early college student surveys that were administered in spring 2020 or through spring 2021, we opted to include more visualizations, including videos, into the orientation that was used for the second pilot in fall 2022. As one student very eloquently expressed in a spring 2021 survey, visuals and videos are the cornerstone of online learning. Paired with that, we also condensed and streamlined some of the written content. However, we were careful not to edit down the content too heavily, as it is important for students to understand that they will be expected to read and read carefully in their early college studies. We looked at the onboarding process as well. And for the fall 2022 pilot, I created a startup guide for the coordinators that intended to give them a more clear idea of what to expect in the process, including a general timeline and expectations for them to impart to their students. In addition, Amy created the introductory video that we saw that was shared with coordinators and students ahead of the orientation to better help them understand the orientation and how to get started in LaLima. We will continue to utilize these updates in the next pilot, which is coming up for spring 2023, and have discussed plans about how to evolve this even further. The last notable update is that we issued certificates of completion to students who earned a passing score on the orientation. All of these updates were made in relation to feedback received from participating students and coordinators. Next slide, please. And earlier in this section, Nicole shared some of the data, and I think one thing that we saw was that there was a very substantial jump in the number of completers between the two pilots. And I think that it's safe to say that a very substantial part of the reason for that is because of the work that Dina did with her students. So I'm happy to turn it over to her to hear about her experience.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so this is our second, well, we participated at Lelehu High School in both of the UH Online Early College orientations and have all positive things to say about it. So I'm just going to share a little bit about our school's experience. A little bit about our school. Lelehu is out there in Waihewa. We do have a diverse population of students, including a big military population. We are a Title I school, and we have about 1,600 students in total. As for early college in particular at our school, we started back in 2013 with 9 students, I think, taking English 100. And our early college enrollment has steadily grown in the past few years and really jumped pretty significantly, where this fall we have about 178 students and they're taking 10 all asynchronous classes. So this orientation was really helpful with that. And then coming up in the spring of 23, we'll have students in grades 9 through 12, about 225 of them, taking mostly asynchronous classes, but a couple of synchronous ones. And then we have an awesome partner in Leeward Community College, where we do all of our classes. Well, we do have one shared after school course with the University of Hawaii, West Oahu. And then something to note for our school is one of those that has the majority of our MOA students sitting in a class period with me, or with one of our other early college teachers. So they do have one early college period in their regular high school schedule. So we get to see them on a regular basis. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So I had every student who was in their first semester of an early college course participate in the online orientation. And I think that it really helped them, and it helps me to be more prepared to start the courses. Some of the main benefits, and I know you've already heard this, but I think they really benefited from just that basic login and navigation, even just learning how to favorite their course so that it would pop up easily, learning how to move through the lessons and activities and the importance of contacting an instructor and how to do it. And then even just like they mentioned module 3 already, but submitting an actual assignment, saving a PDF, like some basic things like that really made a difference that the students were able to practice that in the orientation. Posting a forum, and then also seeing that the instructors did give feedback and then how they post their grading and things like that. It's really great because it allowed my students to actually interact and actually do things in La Lima instead of just kind of watching a demonstration or looking at screenshots. Yeah, so it really did help me and the students to go through that. Next slide. So for the scheduling and timing, yes, the entire orientation can be done in a few hours, but I definitely found that'd be better to break it up a little bit and assign the modules over the course of a week or two. And again, I have my students sitting with me in class for 2 to 3 days a week. So I'm able to monitor their progress a little bit more and help them a little bit easier than I think some other situations might have. I know not everyone has that luxury, but so just a reminder that the online orientation can be completely done by students on their own time, as there are some really good videos, starting with that first instructional video that you can kind of point out to them and then they can work on it themselves. However, I have found that working through the first module with them has been really helpful. So again, I understand this might not work for everybody, but if you don't have students sitting in a class with you, it is possible for the students to do it, completely asynchronous. The students can work on it on their own. Okay, next slide. So for me, this is just an example of how I might assign the modules. Again, 5 modules. So for module 1 and 2, I'd probably assign it as an in-class assignment one day. And I would try to go through module 1 with the class. I'd show the videos in front of the class and kind of just stop for work time in between when students need to complete the tasks. If you don't have students sitting with you, I was thinking maybe if you have a parent night or like a meeting before the semester starts, maybe you can just work module 1 into that meeting. And then for module 2, we'd, like I said, do it in class that first day. Can definitely do the 2 modules in one day. And then I'd have the students just work on it on their own, but then with classmates and teacher support if needed. Again, this is just a sample of what I think will work for my class, yeah. But module 3 is something I would assign on day 2 as an in-class assignment, but just kind of have students work in it independently, and then again with peer and teacher support if needed. And then I would go ahead and assign module 4 and 5 as sort of a homework type thing to make sure that they can handle that on their own and work on it on their own. Okay, next slide. So I know that you saw the comments from the evaluation already, and I'm just kind of repeating some of them here, but I did want to point these out again because, yeah, students did say that they spent about 1 to 4 hours on the orientation, and most of them were somewhere around, I think, the 2 to 3 hour mark for my students. But I thought it was worth mentioning that the students really did indeed find this orientation to be valuable. They, even though it was more work for them and they knew it was more work for them, the majority of the students said that, yeah, they definitely think it should be mandatory, as you already saw from Nicole. So I thought that was really cool that they, it was more work for them, but they still thought it was a good thing to make it mandatory for future students. So I'll definitely be requiring this for students who are new to early college and new to their online courses in the future. And then every single student of mine who completed the evaluation said that they felt that they got better at the things listed there. So as you already saw in the evaluations. Okay, last slide, I think. So as a teacher, if some of you are teachers there, it's really up to you how involved you get in the orientation. Once you get the students started, you really don't have to do anything if you don't want to. Wendy and Nicole and Amy have already set it up really awesome. The students can complete this completely on their own, and then Wendy can send you their completion rate and their grades later on. But I think that even if the students do completely do it on their own, it's still beneficial for them to get a chance to learn how to log into Laulima and navigate and click around on the site. They get a chance to try it without any super harsh consequences yet before their real course begins, right? And then the biggest thing you really need to do as a teacher or as the early college coordinator is to identify the students who are going to be doing this online orientation and to be prepared to send Wendy a list of the students and their email addresses. I sometimes got delayed just because I took too long trying to collect those things. So what I would usually do is just as soon as the students create their usernames, their UH usernames, I would just have them fill out a simple Google form with their name and their full UH email address so that I can have it ready and try to forward it to Wendy as soon as she needs it. But then also just planning ahead to make sure to give your students enough time to complete the orientation. I'd recommend trying to make sure there's an extra day or two put into those deadlines, just in case, a day or two, just in case the students need to make some revisions or read the comments from the instructors. Because for some students, we kind of ran out of time at the end, and they did have some things they had to submit or revise, but it started to overlap with the first week of those college courses. And in some cases, I had to just say, okay, we're gonna stop doing the orientation right now. We're gonna focus on your college course because it already started. So I try to schedule in a day or two just to get it done completely before the college courses start. So, I mean, yes, it definitely takes a couple extra days of work for the students, but so far it's only been positive results from introducing students to this orientation. And honestly, it's really minimal work on my part when it comes down to it. It's Nicole and Wendy and Amy doing all the work, and the students, of course. But yeah, I would definitely encourage new students to do this. And we want to participate every semester, so keep us on the list. That's it.
So we're just going to really quickly share our future plans related to the orientation before opening it up for some Q&A time. So next slide, please. So we are definitely offering another pilot of the UH Early College Online Orientation before the Spring 23 term. And we really, really hope to systematize the UH Early College Online Orientation and provide access to students statewide in the future. As a side note, little caveat, because it's Amy, me, and Wendy providing the facilitation right now, that's why we haven't expanded statewide yet, but we're trying to look into some additional capacity issues so that we're able to support more students in the future?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge one for us, just because it has admittedly been very challenging given the heavy workload that we all have. So absolutely, before this rolls out statewide, we'll need to ensure that there's a sustainable plan in place. We do hope that schools offering early college classes will integrate the orientation as a resource for students taking an online early college class for the first time. Please contact me within the next couple of weeks if your school is interested. Dina will definitely keep you on the list. Our spring 2023 pilot is just around the corner. I was just realizing that this morning. So we are expecting to roll this out in December. So if you're interested, please contact me. My contact information will be listed in the last slide. Next slide. And I think we're ready to start taking some questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you.
I can address one of the questions. So yes, the Zoom is covered in the optional activities and assignments module since some students are not using Zoom. So we have that embedded in there. So there's a tutorial on how to use that.
But I saw you added some other questions as well. So you had a question about how do I find out if the high school through which you're teaching your early college class includes an early college orientation requirement? And how do you help it be implemented if they don't include this as a pre-class learning tool? So I guess what I'd say is you are welcome to talk to the high school directly, the early college coordinator at the high school, to find out if they're requiring it. If you would like more information, though, you're also welcome to reach out to me too. My email address is on this slide. Right now, the way that we have it set up is that because we're asking high school early college coordinators to provide us with the list of students with their names and UH email addresses, it's something that high schools have to opt in to participate in. In the future, that may change, but that's the way that it's set up right now. And so it's up to the high schools to determine if they have capacity to support that. We are hoping that more high schools will be interested in participating, particularly high schools that are continuing to be interested in offering online early college classes. Wendy, did you want to add anything?
I think what I'll add to that one is I think that we're going to see an evolution as to how schools participate as well over time, because we've been fortunate to work with partners that have had a very substantial number of students be able to participate. But I think what we're going to start seeing is more schools who have just a very small number who would still like to participate. And that's totally fine. We're very welcoming of anything. I think the main criteria is that these are students that are taking these online early college classes for the first time, because that's really where that benefit is going to be. So even if it's just like 1 to 2 students from a school, we'll take them because we think that this is a very successful strategy to help them get onboarded.
So there is a question about how long the orientation takes to complete. So we think it takes 2.5 hours to complete. As you saw from some of the data before, it took some students longer than that. I'm going to be honest, like the data was kind of all over the place. Like it took some students an hour and a half. It took other students like 4 hours to complete the orientation. I would say on average, it's 2.5 hours to complete the orientation. I think it probably, what could contribute to more of the time is some of the assignments, like how detailed students choose to be with some of them. The daily, weekly time scheduler assignment, you can go into a lot of detail about your daily and weekly schedule. And for the La Lima profiles that students need to complete in Module 2, I know we've had students express to us that was kind of like, oh God, what do I put in here? And so they spent like a lot of time thinking about what picture do I put up that looks kind of professional? How do I introduce myself to my other students participating in this orientation? So I think it's kind of how much time the student chooses to put into it. But I think all of the information in it could be completed in 2.5 hours. And we don't normally make students redo assignments unless the assignment was just like totally not related to what the question was. So hopefully there isn't too much like redoing that students would need to do. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I would absolutely agree with that, Nicole. With the assignments and with the overall orientation, we're trying to create a low stakes environment. So all of the assignments and activities, they have the option to submit a second and third time. And I'm the one that scores those daily, weekly schedulers. And what I find is I give them some feedback. And even though I've given them full points on the assignment, they still resubmit it because they want to basically respond to that feedback. They want to add more detail. They want to realize that, oh, they didn't schedule in homework time. They want to rename it because it's good practice to make sure that when you submit an assignment, that the file name is descriptive of the assignment and your personal information. So I do think it's a lot of what the student is putting into it as to how much time it takes.
I guess what I would add to both of those comments is it's kind of interesting because we definitely, from our perspective, want to foster a low stakes environment. But what we didn't realize until we started reading the student feedback was that to them, or at least to some of them, it is high stakes. And thinking about that module where they have to post to a forum, I mean, we weren't thinking about the fact that students were kind of stressing over the photo that they're selecting and how they're going to introduce themselves to their peers. But that ended up being, pretty important to them. So I think that this has been a very helpful reminder about the students that we actually are serving, and getting a chance to actually read their comments, to interact with them, to see the way that they engage with each other has really been special and added a new dynamic to the work that we do for early college. So I'm very appreciative of it.
So we have one more minute with you guys if anyone else wants to add anything into the chat. Otherwise, I guess we just wanted to say that if you are a high school and you are interested in having your students taking an online early college class for the first time participate in this orientation, please reach out to Wendy. Her email address is listed on this slide. And if you are a UH instructor or at a UH campus and you're curious in learning more about this orientation and whether your high school partners will be participating, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is also on this slide. So thank you so much, everyone. We're glad that you could join our session. Okay, sorry. One more question. Would there be an ongoing workshop type series in mind for La Lima upgrades that occur every once in a while? I think that question is asking, Amy, tell me if you're reading it the same way, if we're going to update the early college online orientation as our La Lima upgrades, or are you thinking it's from the instructor perspective, Amy?
I think it just like with every La Lima upgrade, there are some tweaks. So I know that UH Online Innovation Center has been doing some videos about those upgrades. As you know, the tools that we're using, the functionality may increase, but the tool itself is still more or less the same. I think a lot of the changes may be more on the setup side, but I would encourage you to take a look at UHOIC, because I know I watched one of them a couple of months ago and I was like, oh, that's great. Now I can do this within the orientation. So I can go ahead and I think we're out of time. I'll try to get the link and put it in the chat.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Amy, for your time. Thank you, Dina, for all of the incredible work that you're doing with your students on a day-to-day basis. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at other sessions of the convening.